Why did I not get to this game earlier? Solatorobo, properly pronounced as Solatorobo, meaning skies and robots, was the 2011 second entry into CyberConnect's Little Bronx franchise. One that I apparently got some bad info on when I covered Tail Concerto. While I didn't go much into the backstory of the games, there apparently was a lot of thought put into the world building of the universe, as I am to expect of CyberConnect's games, which honestly just didn't show that much from initial reading of Tail Concerto. To be fair, first efforts usually laid the groundwork for bigger things, thus you don't always see where such would be going. Tail Concerto 2, as originally envisioned, was going to expand on those points, such as why everyone's living on those islands in the sky, why cats and dogs are living together without mass hysteria, and what is up with those super shit evil titans anyways. But Bandai passed on the project, so like any company would do with a good idea, CyberConnect held onto it until farther down the line. After the .hack franchise started to fizzle out thanks to the disaster that is the Link Onwards content, and them getting commissioned by Capcom to make Ashura's Wrath too much following acclaim, well, Bandai decided to throw them a bone and it worked out for them. Bandai of America did not, though. Solatorobo had to be published by both Nintendo themselves in Europe and Exceed Games in America, as this is around when Bandai of America, in their bottomless stupidity, decided to largely stop importing the library of content their parent Japanese branch was supporting, to their endless spiral of financial losses. There is a reason why they basically stopped doing anything but redistribute the Asian English releases of video games, people, such as what happened with Super Robot Wars 30. But yeah, what I got wrong when covering Tail Concerto? I was told there was zero continuity between the very Little Bronx games, just using the same setting to tell stories that don't relate to each other. And while that is technically true, Tail Concerto's events don't directly affect or continue on into Solatorobo, the characters from the first game actually do show up, and they're counted as occurring after the events of Tail Concerto. So yeah, there is continuity between the games. It is just soft continuity where each game's events don't directly relate to one another, but happen in sequence to each other. And in terms of the following entries, well, I have no idea how the mobile game Little Tell Story relates with regards to this, because it was a mobile game shut down literally 8 months after its launch, but the most recent entry, last year's Fuga Melodies of Steel, is contextually set before both Tail Concerto and Solatorobo, as part of the larger series backstory of these games occurring within a time of peace, while Fuga was during a great continent-spanning war. And yes, we will hopefully be getting to Fuga eventually. But since Little Tell Story was a mobile game, I hate mobile games, and I know of no one that has captured footage of it for a bypass, yeah, I'm not doing that one. I am just saying that up front. Though I should also note something odd about how the translation for this one was handled. Several of the returning characters have their names misspelled. Now, normally I would write this off as just Bandai of America incompetence, as I usually do, but as I said, they passed entirely on this game. So I went digging a bit further, and found that Atlas, when they imported Tail Concerto, actually corrected the spelling of some English misromanizations CyberConnect 2 supplied originally to them, which were then used as the official English names, and thus why they were consistent when these names were written as the background NPCs in .hack's IMOC tetralogy. The translation team for Solatorobo, though, did not check these spellings to confirm them, but left them as they were when other supplementary material used incorrect romanizations. So here we are. This is a bit baffling to me, as otherwise, well, they did a good job with the localization and staying true to what was supposed to be said, so it makes sense. It was just this one hang-up where they screwed up. Hell, the localization team actually contributed something important to the series: the official names for the beastmen races we encounter in the Little Bronx universe. The Kaninu for the dog people, and the Philineko for the cat people, both of which are portmanteaus of the zoological species name with the Japanese term for each respective animal. Before this point, in Japanese, they were just literally Inu Ningen, dog person, and Neko Ningen, cat person. These literal translations being what Atlas's translation of Tail Concerto used. And frankly, I like Kaninu and Philineko as names a lot more. It's rare I ever say that about English localization-rooted terms. And CyberConnect actually tried to do something kinda cool with this game as well, which got it pretty decent sales. Solatorobo is the world record holder for number of distinctly different advertisement commercials that were made for it, clocking in at a grand total of 100 different ads made, all of which contain and detail different aspects of the story and game. Each commercial is not a long ad. Most of the time, Japanese ads tend to be pretty short, so every product you can think of can see spotlight in the most optimum time possible. But having flipped through all of them, it's actually really impressive that CyberConnect's team was able to do that many. Granted, to sell a product, you really only should need about, one really good ad and maybe some supplementary ones, or a couple of them chained together that tell a story between them. It's clear, though, that as they went on, that they were scraping the bottom of the barrel for 15-second ad spots.
Action RPG, Solatorobo.
Yeah, not all of them were going to be winners. Regardless of that, despite me being a huge CyberConnect fan, and at that point when it released in 2011 doing all the legwork to start putting together .hack Retrospective in 2012, I'd actually missed out on the game until 2018, at which point I was able to score a copy when I started looking into getting other games from CyberConnect's library that I hadn't before. Thankfully, other people didn't sleep on it, and the game was received very well across the markets. But unlike in Japan, where the game had a huge push, it is another case where no advertisement for a game caused it to not receive as big an audience or sales as it could have once brought over here. It's probably a factor as to why CyberConnect, when releasing Fuga in 2021, did such a huge advertising blitz via social media. One I personally didn't join in on the hype of because I again got stuck working a ridiculous amount of overtime in 2021. 400 hours of it. Yeah, being called in that much for my daytime job didn't actually leave me the time to help promote Fuga. Though, ironically, when the game finally did get out, it was when I was recording footage of Solatorobo for this review. And then I didn't have time to play Fuga at all its release year. I'll get to it eventually, dude. Jeez. Written by Yasuhiro Noguchi, who is also credited as writing Ashura's Wrath and Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, alongside being staffed on a bunch of other games such as Xenosaga, Solatorobo is the story of Red Savarine, a Kanino in the nation of the Shepherd Republic, doing odd jobs for the people as a hunter, a catch-all title for local mercenaries willing to help for a price. Accompanying him as his tech-specialized quarterback is his Philoneco foster sister, Chocolate Gelato, as they do odd jobs everywhere they can with help of Red's robot the Dahak, which he's had for longer than he can remember. Literally, he showed up at the orphanage where he first met Chocolate, already having it. And as some more mythology-savvy members of my audience might already get the significance of the name, yes, Red and the Dahak are named after Azi Dahaka from Persian mythology, the name meaning burning dragon in some interpretations, and the Azi part of the homage name being found in the Dahak serial number, AZI-03. Here's where this gets funny though. Red's voice actor is Tetsuya Kakihara, best known for playing Natsu Dragneel in Fairy Tail, and also Simon the Digger in Gurren Lagann. He is an amnesiac man with an adopted sibling, piloting a red dragon robot, fighting giant robots to defend a beast race from destruction. I know, right? This was crazy specific, unexpected actor illusion stuff going on. Now, I would play clips of them speaking, but unfortunately when I was recording the game, I had this problem with my audio cable that caused this just plain terrible squeaking sound to appear in my headphones and on the master copies, and I'd rather not subject people to that if I can help it. Apparently that's a recurring problem with people who have recorded DS games. I was unaware of that since this is the first DS game I recorded for review. And I've hopefully fixed it for the few I plan to do in the future while I'm waiting to figure out how to jailbreak my 3DS so it can support wireless recording as well. 'Cause there's also a pair of 3DS games I've got to do too. And as we enter the game, the pair are on another mission, being asked to retrieve a stolen file that has fallen into the hands of sky pirates, who mercs like Red often fight with over the course of their jobs as hunters. This quickly introducing the Dahak's combat abilities. And I much prefer it over Waffle's mech, and it does handle much better than his patrol robo. The Dahak's a pretty mobile unit, specializing in intercepting projectiles with its large dexterous hands to throw back at enemies. or lifting off the ground entirely to throw repeatedly in pretty fair chain combos. You can even jump and throw them for a higher damage rating, though you kinda need to be good at hitting the keys correctly to do that. All in all, it's a pretty functional system, and throughout my time playing the game, I really didn't have that much trouble handling it. Though this is probably because I stayed on top of the game's collectible upgrades and fought every enemy thing I could to stay on top of the EXP grind, since every level up is pretty fair at increasing red and the Dahak's hit points. Throughout the explorable environment, you can find crystals that can improve the control system by unlocking squares in a Mega Man Navi customizer-like improvement system, where you can buy and collect parts that upgrade the stats of the unit's four main capabilities: mobility, defense, hydraulics, and attack. Mobility and defense are obvious, but there are two different strength stats because the hydraulics of the mech decide how quickly you can lift the enemy units off their feet, and the attack is then the multiplier for how much damage you deal to whatever you're fighting when you throw them to the ground. Like an adult. The one problem I had with finding the collectibles, called pre-crystals, is, well, there literally isn't enough of them to unlock every block of the customizer grid, at least the first time through. The game does feature a New Game Plus system, and when you go through the game subsequent times, you keep all the currency and items you got in previous playthroughs, and can unlock even more in New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus, making it pretty easy to just go through the game again without any major hassles. And since you don't need to get every part or every upgrade to make it through to the final boss, this isn't a bad thing. Just make sure if you choose to play through that you've gotten enough of the blocks unlocked to be able to get all your stats upgraded to the 30s or 40s with assistance of the rare equipment parts. If you do that, then you should be all set. Though, fair warning, don't buy the rare parts 1 through 3. It's honestly just a waste of money as the blocks are that big on the board. Until you get some money saved up and the customizer grid expanded enough, just stockpile your earnings until you get to the fishing minigame, as the fishing minigame ends up giving you some of the best parts before you can access the premium shop in the second half of the game. Get the rare part force the first time through, or purchase the rare 5s and 6s in New Game Plus. Even beyond that, if you prioritize defense and hydraulics first, you should be able to survive. Most of what the game throws at you, at least. And the game is not all about riding the robot. Red gets to go solo to get around various obstacles and hit switches that can change around how you're able to traverse the areas by triggering lifts, doors, and whatnot. Helped as well as, since this is a Nintendo DS game, well, they had to use the second screen for something. Thus you get a nice, convenient heads-up display throughout the game to tell you where you're going, and map the explorable areas at all times. The split screen for the DS, though, as once again this is my first time reviewing an NDS game, resulted in a bunch of problems, and not just in the sense of how aggravating it is for game streamers and reviewers to actually get footage of DS games for review, as you can't actually buy Nintendo DS capture cards anymore. I was actually one of the last to get one. A lot of the time, the second screen would end up useless to actually playing the game, as you'd be focused on one and not the other. Smart developers just left them up as a quick access menu or viewable navigation map as was done here. And if that was all it did, I'd have shrunk the second screen tiny and set it to the side so I wasn't awkwardly stacking the squares and the full image would be bigger. But then, when I started getting to the game's cutscenes, that's where the problem came up, as they are split between both screens. I really don't know who decided to do this, but CyberConnect was not the only game developer to make this a thing, and it's just so damn annoying. As what kept happening was to accommodate the use of both screens, they'd zoom in on a scene so you just seen in parts between them instead of zooming it out and recentering it in one. It got obnoxious fast whenever someone would do it, as instead of expanding view on a moment like, say, widescreen TV does so you can see more around a moment, it instead shrinks and collapses the view vertically. You see less this way, not more. And yes, sometimes less is more, but it just really is not effective this way. And worse, things like this is actually why it's really hard to remaster or port NDS games regardless of what they are, as the game mechanics built into such games to take advantage of the second screen with touch control capabilities makes it really difficult to program in a new means to utilize those mechanics. I mean, maybe if they tried importing NDS games to the Wii U via the digital game store, or created a slot adapter so the Wii U could play DS games. That might have been a way around this. but it just gets damn annoying to think about what could have been done if it weren't for pandering to a gimmick, and that's regardless of how well the DS and the 3DS sold. Anyways, as Red makes it onto the airship to get to the file they were asked to retrieve, we end up in a race to get it from the opposing guild Curvaz, who split themselves between being rival hunters and pirates themselves as an unofficial army of the region. But the thing is, they are not after the file themselves, but an amulet that's hidden among the items in the ship's hold. One that actually resonates and binds itself to Red, calling from the depths of the seas of clouds a gigantic titan of destruction. Well, you can see the Tail Concerto parallels and differences right here. Tail Concerto? The bad guy of the game wanted to wake up one of these things as its endgame. Solatorobo? You bonding to this medallion triggers it being woken up, and the game initially is about putting the damn things back to sleep. Granted, these specific ones keep waking up, so it's not just the medallion doing it. And to that end, it sends its own spore-like Kubia Gomorrah minions to eliminate threats to it. Red quickly destroying the things, only to find a young Philoneco girl suddenly on board, and injured in the attack. This is L, spelled E-L-H, and no, I have no idea if that's how you pronounce her name, though Red mistakes L for a young boy initially simply due to her being rather androgynous for the races. Well, that and she's 13. And has been 13 for a few hundred years. L is a paladin, part of a special order among the races that are trained in special arts that are meant for the suppression of these super ancient war machines, named Titano Machina, in the event someone on accident wakes them up and threatens the world with them. The problem, though, is some jackass wiped out most of her order some time ago, with only one other of them being left alive, and they're not on speaking terms right now. But both they and L are stuck in a state of biological immortality, unable to die unless they pass this curse onto another who will take on the duties of safeguarding the world from its terror. Code Geass joke, Madoka Magica joke, we're walking. The medallion was hers and key to shutting these machines down, lest they gain power to become fully operational from a set of special power crystals that are hidden within shrines around the Shepherd Island cities, with L offering to pay them a king's ransom if Red and Chocolat help her get the materials needed to shut the Titano Machina down. This also explains a lot about the events of Tail Concerto as well, with these titans not being created by the beast races, but them being precursor technology most people don't have the first inkling about beyond things derived from the tech that have entered common use. Most tech in the setting uses these same derivative power crystals between the robots and the ships, which keeps them all operating as they gather and store potential energy from the environment as endless free energy, as long as they're not overclocked and damaged. This also further explains and elaborates on why Waffle breaking one of the special crystals that power these things in Tail Concerto shut them down. The power the crystals generate is just so much on their own, and supply sufficient power in tandem, thus there was no thought for redundancies being necessary. These Machina are a bit different, in that the crystals needed to activate them are not the sole way they draw power, but are nonetheless required to activate and control them. And L's medallion can shut them down if need be by the medallion being charged with their energy, or someone else giving up theirs. As here's the thing L doesn't tell Red. The medallion he picked up, it bonded itself to his life force. So no matter what L does, it won't lock onto another until he dies. And him dying is the actual point of them. That's what it's designed to do. Use a living person as a replacement battery to overload the Machina so they go back to sleep. This won't happen, though, if she can collect the other crystals to use them to shut down the rampaging Machina. But if all else fails, well, one life in exchange for the thousands that could be lost if one of these things attacks a city. It is a difficult, but understandable choice that she absolutely does not want to make again if she can help it. The last time she did, being rather traumatizing as told in one of the tie-in short stories for the game. As Red is just that honest and earnestly a good boy. And all good dogs go to heaven, even if they are secretly dragons. The complication, of course, is the Curvaz are also after the gemstone to control the Titano Machina, as their leader, named Bruno, is a power-mad old man seeking their own path to immortality that can be found by fusing himself with the Titano Machina, and sends out his forces to claim his prize. spearheaded by his elite special ops unit consisting of the trio of Opera, Gren, and Valua, who are all ace pilots of their own mechs and the interim boss battles you'll face, with them in turn retrieving the stones so they can be researched by the Curvez's head scientist, Meriville. Am I pronouncing that right? Merveille. Who is secretly attempting to undermine Bruno's goal as she understands the true power and terror of the Titanomachina, and what they can unleash, thanks to her collaboration with a Philoneco named Beluga, that is L's fellow paladin. But Beluga's more extreme methods having caused the divide between him and L. For on the outside, and for a fair chunk of the game, it does seem like Beluga is trying to help the leader of Curvaz cause the very calamity their order was formed to prevent. This forms the story arc for the first half of the game, as Red and L travel across the islands trying to find leads in the crystals, the Titanomachina, the ancient race that created them, and anything that can help them along the way. This primarily takes the form of all sorts of interim missions that provide Red with cash, resources, and comrades that can help them on their mission alongside exploring the environment, which are all likewise key to the collectibles of the game. As has become standard for CyberConnect 2 games, there is a completion checklist where you can put together concept art and normal art of the game and cast, alongside acquiring lore primers for the setting's extensive backstory, which otherwise doesn't have an impact to the active story. The stuff that relates to the active story, of course, being addressed within the game itself, and even a number of in-jokes to CyberConnect's collaborators. An example of the last one, in the second half of the story, a local pop star is too nervous about the sales rankings of their newest hit, so hire us to look at who's in number 1, and the winner of the week is the musical group Lien. Lien, for those not aware, is the published name for CyberConnect's in-house musical composition team, song composer Chikayo Fukuda, and singer Tomoyo Mitani, and I couldn't help but laugh when I saw their name pop up in here. Honestly, while the game does get a bit heavy on the side quests for Red to raise his hunter rank due to the game literally giving you 80 of them to do, I absolutely despise the airship racing game you end up needing to get involved in, as I absolutely suck at it. A lot of them are actually pretty fun, and aren't tedious to do, as each of them is there to get you to learn new functional mechanics and train you to better master previous ones, while allowing you to get to know and gain camaraderie with the denizens of the world. Again, this contrasts how far CyberConnect had come from their first game, as when you traveled around Prairie and Tail Concerto, you went to places only really distinguished by their geographical features, and then the game's content just seemed to blur past a certain point. But in Solatorobo, you're given a reason to become invested in the people as you help them out, and interact with them and the regions you visit because of those characters. It ends up being the difference between a house and a home. They're both places where someone resides, but one denotes detachment where someone merely exists, while the other implies that is where they live. There's more attention paid to investing us within the setting and these locations by these interactions, and most of them pay off really well. And a number of these missions are designed to be repeatable, both to beat your own personal score and to slowly gain the funds to improve the Dahak from them. Though personally, I find the best quest to repeat is the Battle Arena, which has a bit of a story arc into and of itself. Not as deeply as, say, .hack GU's repeated grind through the arena in its various story acts, but yeah, in each chapter of the game, you've got a new challenge to do there, which tests both your leveling and in certain matches, your capability to pilot the Dahak. The arena's story arc starts off as you encounter Princess Teria and Cyan from Tail Concerto, who encourage you to rise up and surpass greater challenges in the arena than just beating up any enemy beastman mech and wild animal the arena runners will drag in for the day. Though these challenges end up the result of a bit of Red's own ego getting the better of him after he starts winning regularly in the matches, them acting as self-imposed rules, and I actually do recommend doing these a few times each. Not just to get extra money from doing it, but as practice with the mechanics, or lack thereof, they want you to employ. It really helps building muscle memory in maneuvering the mech through later stuff, especially the no-damage challenges. And while I hated doing those, by requiring them in the way the game did, I actually got a slight bit better at evading the damage the enemies of the game would deal. Because I in general suck at both evasion and blocking in games with this kind of interactive overworld, this really helped get me in the right mindset to be able to dodge better, even if it was only by the slightest margin, and that added up down the road. The other important minigame that's going to eat your time, though, is Battleship Fishing. No, battleships in this game are not sentient, or for that matter, anthropomorphed into cute girls. It more has to do with the other species that show up in the series. There is literally an entire species of giant enemy crab in this game that somehow live in the Cloud Sea, and the beast races have had a history of warfare that more based themselves off of ships that floated in that sea, as opposed to the airships used now. One of the land masses has been massively expanded from the use of the shells of the battleship's wrecks, and around it in turn has clustered entire colonies of these crabs as a result. Thus, one of the beastmen acts as a fishing trainer and has you harpoon them in so you can assemble them for meat in the crab's case, and parts from the battleships that are drug up. Thing is though, the fishing minigame comes in two parts, actually harpooning the crabs and then reeling them in. Each time you go out to fish, you need to buy an entirely new harpoon, and that's where the money sink for this comes in. Your best odds to succeed in this require you to use the best harpoon as much as you can for the rare catches, as it then makes it easier to reel them in. As if you're not careful, you can overload the reel line, and if that snaps, you lose them. But if you don't reel them in fast enough, they can go past the limit of the reel's length. You can decrease tension in the line by pulling the D-pad in the way it's directed while button mashing as fast as you can, and decrease tension on the line by just not doing anything until the line cools down, at the cost of increasing the distance you need to reel them in. If you manage to flip them over, though, as you're reeling, you get free reel time, and button mashing in those moments is absolutely key to getting them in fast. The rarer the crab you fish in, the better the items you get for it, which are traded in for points. And those points are key to getting a lot of pea crystals from the guy, alongside a few differing customization parts. Key in this is, it is actually much cheaper to get from him a custom part called Revive that gives you a free health bonus in the event you're not great at the game, and will save you from death one time per Revive part. It's not a permanent part, it's consumed by the revival, but it's another way you can compensate in the event you just suck at things. Admittedly, it's probably smarter to invest in defensive upgrade parts so you take less damage per hit you might take, and the space the revive part takes up in the customizer isn't worth it once you can afford the parts, but it is an option at the very least if you're struggling. Honestly though, while the amount of side quests did get a bit excessive, probably to contrast against .hack.gu where it never seemed like the quest shop had enough to offer, I ended up liking most of the ones we ended up doing. With Red being a hunter, it fit his description of being a helpful odd jobs man willing to take tasks offered, and the game is likewise self-aware with Red's conduct on this too, that he is exasperated with how often something he's prioritized in importance ends up waylaid because an interim task is blocking his path to his more immediate goal. It doesn't mean he's going to be a jerk about it, more that he's become genre savvy with regards to how frequently he gets detoured from the task at hand. Granted, this is one of those games that likes to treat the main character as an idiot protagonist, and it's once again a case where I really don't see why. Ignorance is unintentional. Stupidity is deliberate, and you don't really see that here. Yeah, Red isn't the smartest dog in the kennel, but it's not like he needs to be, and he never acts in a way inappropriate to the situation, which actual stupid people do, or deliberately makes things worse instead of better. True idiot protagonists, where their flaws are an active detriment to the well-being of others, are more than deserving of ridicule, and I have done so for years. But I have never understood the bashing that happens against people that aren't book smart, but are otherwise capable and skilled in a variety of other ways where their conduct isn't ever harmful. And the side quests, as I inferred before, are where we end up encountering Waffle and the Priss sisters. Alicia had taken her siblings, and her Black Cats gang and uprooted themselves from Prairie primarily to go sightseeing now that there's an active truce between her and Waffle after the events of Tail Concerto. Oh, if they're up to mischief, Waffle will still intercede to stop them, but the worst thing she and her minions do all game is 1. Steal a guy's photo book as he accidentally snapped a photo of Alicia trying to dress up as a princess to make herself look more appealing to Waffle, so as to steal his gaze from Princess Teria, who, as said, is also around, and Alicia was completely and utterly embarrassed by it. 2. There's an airship race where the air patrol along the borders mistakes their balloon for an invader that causes an entire big chase. And 3. She later hires a bunch of pirates in order to fake a kidnapping attempt and get her sisters to try and hire Waffle to save her, Also, she can finally have a legitimate, in her eyes, excuse to finally start expressing her feelings for him openly, as opposed to her being stuck on the Soon setting all the time due to her past as a pirate and gang leader. Even though she's been actively trying to not cause any mischief, so Waffle would see her being better than she was. And all the while that she's doing this, Waffle wants to go back to being as close as they were. But of course, that is the cost of the tsundere. And I think part of why I end up having a fascination with characters that bear the trait is the expression of insecurity is just, well, relatable when it's used properly, and the struggle to work through that because they care about other people so much, even as they try to not give everything away, can be engaging. Even if it can be wince-inducing to see them fail because of their own inability to be honest with themselves and those they love to just admit things outright. When the character with the trait is being portrayed well, you end up rooting for them to be able to surpass themselves before it is too late. I will not defend the bad interpretations of tsunderes, though. Mamoru has similar stories, tied to having Red help out with rescue work throughout the game, dealing with either disasters or safety awareness as you would expect to be tasks given by Fukuoka's personal safety mascot. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised to see the guy here, as when I found out about him during my research for Tale Concerto, literally nothing and no one told me about him appearing in this game as he does. I think it might be because with regards to the players of these games, well, in the West, this doesn't exactly connect as that relevant since he's not a mascot for something here. I don't even know what a good comparison would be to equate exactly what this is. Mamoru is not a company mascot, so it's not equivalent to Sunrise's Haro or Sega's Sonic. He's not an influential creator that stayed on with a company to give advice and encouragement to the company's various productions like Stan Lee was with Marvel. He's a PSA advertisement character that was adopted by CyberConnect's home city of Fukuoka, acting no different than a local hero character. And yet, here he is in this game, because the backstory for the mascot character has this world be his home. It'd be like if Beautiful Joe showed up in a Kamen Rider video game, and that's not even a good analogy for this either. Beyond this, though, what the utilization of the side quests helps with is getting L and Red to build an active dynamic between them and learn about each other, similar to how GU used its character quest to explore them. But without the rotation of available characters, it's far more driven in Solatorobo in grounding and building upon how Red's just open goodwill gets Elle to pull herself out of her shell her duties and immortal isolation have left her in over the centuries. The character becoming far more outgoing and willing to play along with the antics they get involved with over time, and legitimately finding that she likes being around him more than anything. While she's the super book-smart learned one of the two, her years existing haven't really given her a true grasp of people, and Red, the good-natured adventurer, despite only being 17, has gained the life experiences needed to be wiser to the world. Helped that, well, a number of the places they go to are bug-infested, and as is the old trope, she's terrified of them, meaning Red has to bring up the Dragonfire to burn them away. Then again, when an insect on this world makes Waspinator from Transformers Beast Wars look like he is appropriately life-sized inside their series, I'd think a phobia towards them is a bit more warranted. Yeah, I'm not kidding on that. There's an entire stage where the island is infested with giant insects as part of its natural ecosystem. I shouldn't really be surprised. After all, we were fighting and fishing up giant enemy crabs earlier. Having a race of benign chimera ants, that's not so surprising. And the post-game content of the story eventually reveals that, yeah, Red and L, the two end up developing mutual feelings for the other. They're just a bit too insecure yet to really act on them. At least for a few years until Elle is physically older. As part of her arc is the eventual means by which to break her curse of immortality that will allow her to live just like anyone else once again. And she'd be happiest if she just continued to travel with Red and Chocolat as they continued their work as hunters. And you know what? That works for me, as they build that dynamic between them the right way, as opposed to a certain other immoral character where they have an out-of-place paramour status enforced upon them out of literally nowhere. There is a long story and rant I've attached to that, which is better discussed in another video than here. One I will hopefully do sooner rather than later, as man did Sunrise utterly break that series. But why it works with Elle is Elle's years living haven't robbed her of her insecurities and the ability to form meaningful emotional connections yet, by which to actually present the idea that she develops feelings for Red, and that allows the fuller expression of them once Red's kindness worms its way in. Why romance often doesn't work with an immortal that's become dated to the world is there's no real expression of a formed bond, and that undermines presentation that they have and act on feelings for another individual, especially if they deliberately don't work to save those they purportedly love from their own self-destruction. But that in turn is what wrenches Elle's heart the most as the first act of the game reaches its climax, and Elle has to make a decision about how she wants things to go. For eventually, Curvaz succeeds in claiming all the stones required to fully activate the first of the Titano Machina of the game, Lares, leaving Elle no other option but to fully charge the medallion to stop it, at the cost of Red's life. And she finds that, despite knowing all this time what needed to be done, she can't do it. She can't take his life, no matter what. Not that it helps them at all that Beluga comes in and attacks the pair at this point in his own attempt to stop the ritual, which only leads Elle to fall into Bruno's hands as a result, which exponentially expedites his own plans, with Red's life still tied to the medallion regardless. But this is where the twist comes in regarding Beluga and Marivel's collaboration, as her study of the crystals was required for her to build a device that can overload and shut down the Titano Machina without the medallion needing to go off, and can even be powered by the stones that are waking Lares up to do so. It's just, they needed the stone to figure out how to do it first, even if it risked putting them in Bruno's hands to achieve. And then also for a second reason on Marivel's part that isn't stated in the first half of the game. Thus, Beluga all this time was focused on the same goal Elle was, but wasn't willing to limit himself by the traditions of their lost order to do it, as researchers like Marivel had to open up new ways of doing things that weren't dependent on the pseudo-techno-magic of their ancestors. It's just the means by which he presented this that caused their divide. But now that Elle has someone in her life that is more important than tradition, she'd more than happily throw those old ways away as they aren't worth the cost if something better can be done instead. Oh look, very important allegory that keeps being missed despite it being a theme for literal decades. But Elle being kidnapped as she was? Yeah, Red's pissed off by that, invading the capital ship of the Curvaz, the Golden Roar, in order to get her back and stop Bruno's larger scheme, it causing one grand confrontation with all the larger mid-boss antagonists. But Red will just not be deterred. It does, however, delay Red enough that he ultimately fails to stop Bruno's plan, Lares becoming fully powered and absorbing Bruno into it, and requiring Red, Elle, and Beluga to dive into the giant to shut it down and stop it once and for all with Marivel's power cell. Once more to pull up the Tail Concerto similarities, the inside of Lares very much resembles the Titan from that game, but is certainly far more fleshed out as if it was the innards of an actual living being, or at least an approximation of one on this scale, that we are then traveling through. I again feel that it's thanks to CyberConnect's work on the Dot Hack games that helps better flesh this type of stage out, too. The original Tail Concerto's Titan was just this freaking obnoxious platformer stage. But since then, the IMOC tetralogy had organic-style dungeons we had to travel through to do various things as parts of the various elemental type stages the game featured. And GU in turn had, well, R2's version of Kupia that we had to dive inside of, and Traverse, which feels a lot like this, just without all the frickin' mid-boss doppelgangers. It does have its own version of the self-defense Gomoras, though, causing Beluga to stay behind and leaving it all up to Elle and Red to, oh holy hell, what the hell is this? Is that Bruno? It looks like this devil dog has gone mad with imaginary power and mutated into this. However, with Red resolved to end this crisis once and for all, and becoming enraged when Bruno attacks and hurts Elle, well, something strange happens to him. A power within him surging up, causing him to turn into a human. Okay, I know furries like to dress up as their fursonas, depending on how deep along the anthro scale they are, but it's not often I see something that has them go in the reverse. Also, put on a shirt, dude. This case of inverse lycanthropy is not because of the medallion, by the way. This relates to something revealed in the back half of the game in its second arc. Though, just note Merivale's response for in a bit. But Red taking his hybrid form unlocks new abilities in the Dahak. His taller stature as a human allowing him to physically dock with the mech, and allowing him to charge up and shoot energy blasts that entirely dominates the Lares augmented Bruno and thwarting his plan of world domination. Red then descends to the central core of Lares, and using the power cell shoots out the core. Red's time in human form ending, and them escaping Lares before the Titan collapses back beneath the seas of clouds. However, this is not the end. This is merely the conclusion of the first half of the game, with the focus shifting to the insides of another Titanomachina, where another humanoid individual is waiting patiently for 2 cryostasis pods to open. As the second act begins, we get a flashback to many years before all of this, 2 miners finding a similar pod to the previous ones buried in rock, and causing it to open. This will not end well. Several months have passed since the first act of the game at the point things all start again. L, having split off from Red to help ensure the chaos Bruno caused, has been put to rest as Merivale, Beluga, and Opera have taken over the Curvaz themselves to shift them more back to the force they were before Bruno went nanners. And despite understanding the need to do it, well, Red's bummed that L's not here and working off her debt to them. Since the entire last sequence of events they got in on, in part because L promised to pay them, and they've not gotten a cent from her since. Still, the 2 continue their wanderings until they reach the metropolis of Pharaoh, where things go off the rails with the arrival of 2 individuals, with bodies just like Red's transformed state. These are Nero and Blanc, who identify themselves as beings known as hybrids, high life forms that see the beast people as non-sapient animals, and it's not immoral to kill off wild beasts that are in their way. And worse, what they are in the way of is them resurrecting Lares without the need of the control crystals, alongside another Titanomachina named Lemures, which are key to the actual plans of their own master, an entity named Bion. So, funny story about Nero and Blanc. They're voiced by Kei Araki and Nozomu Sasaki, and their casting ends up being another set of actor allusions to other roles of theirs. Kei Araki, most known as Chibiusa in Sailor Moon, Felicia in Darkstalkers, and the original voice of Hikari from Digimon, while Nozomu Sasaki is known for best voicing Yukishiro Anishi, Yusuke Urameshi, and Shadi from Yu-Gi-Oh! Kei's actor allusions are basically an alignment and animal theme inversion for her Felicia and Hikari roles, while she draws on the character of the Black Lady incarnation of the future princess for the voices she supplies Noir, whereas Nozomu plays into Anishi's omnicidal sprees, Yusuke's disconnect from the status quo, and Shadi's... Well, I view that character as something of the true villain of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series by setting everything in motion, so... yeah. All the more ironic as 2 of the major roles they've been credited as are by authors who've been married for years. Still, Red's anger at the senseless slaughter the 2 are performing with zero remorse causes Red to once more enter his human form, referred to for the rest of the game as his trance state, with Nero and Blanc shocked to find another hybrid confronting them. Unfortunately, the Hawk isn't able to truly handle Red's capabilities in the form, especially against other hybrids, causing it to break down in him to be left defenseless. It's only because they chose to toy with him that Red didn't die from this encounter, recovered by L and brought back to the Golden Roar, where Merivale quickly begins work on upgrading the Dahak to combat them, and handle Red's trance capabilities. How? Well, she's the one who built the Dahak to begin with. For here is what is revealed about Merivale at this point, and why she was so adamant in the first act about stopping not just the Titanomachina, but also L's medallion from killing Red. He is her son. She was the head scientist for the project that created Noir, Blanc, and Red. The former 2 made to the perfect specifications of her patron as a means by which to activate and control Titanomachina. But with Red, she deliberately made him flawed, incapable of reaching his human hybrid form naturally without some outside trigger she didn't think he'd ever be able to reach. But in doing so, allowed him to truly live instead of just existing for one sole but short-lived purpose. For the perfection Bion desired implied stagnation, that there is no need to change and grow and become more than what you are in that moment. And as the project progressed, she saw the small boy she'd made as more real than the tools his siblings had been turned into. Thus, she did the only thing she could for him. 9 years ago, when he was just 8 years old, she gave him the Dahak and told him to leave while lambasting him as a failure so he'd never want to come back. An act that led him to the orphanage where he met Chocolate. It was the only true parental act she'd ever been able to do as his mother until these events started. Grant him the freedom to be, discover, and decide for himself who he is and wants to be, and what he should value. After all, isn't that what a parent should want for their child above all else? The freedom to be happy? But by abandoning him in the way she did, Marival doesn't feel like she has the right to call herself his mother. And upon learning of his true history, that Red originated as an experiment, it leaves him deeply conflicted. And not just towards a deeply repentant and regretful Marival. The two out there attacking the country are genetically his siblings, and they have zero care for the harm they're doing to innocent people as long as they achieve the goals dictated by Bion, as Bion is the one who commissioned all three's creation to begin with. Having originally enslaved several of the scientist members of the beast races after his awakening into his service to fulfill the goals of his hybrid project, as he himself is a hybrid created by the precursor race of the world, set in stasis until the day Operation Coda was to begin. But what he wants is comparatively an abstract to those living now, as it's been centuries, if not millennia since then, which is key to what the new Alliance of the World has to figure out. What do these three actually want with the Titano Machina, and what could their true purpose actually be beyond weapons of war? About that. There's something about the setting of Littletail Bronx I haven't brought up. And it's kind of important because, well, it originated from Mamoru's backstory info, and people thought such was a little silly, out-of-place factoid, but many just wrote such off as a unimportant tidbit. Then Mamoru shows up here, and since this is his world, and everything seems fine and most of the messy parts of the world are from times of more active conflict in the beast race's past, you don't think much of it. Then this plotline starts, and then you start to realize, oh holy crap, they were going for the true deep lore shock moment the entire time, and it's a revelation that redefines the series. As here's the thing about the world of Littletail Bronx, which Red and L eventually discover within the second arc of the game. This planet is Earth. It is Earth after the apocalypse has come and passed, with the beast races the successor species to a humanity that destroyed themselves. These islands in the sky, the last traces of the previously accessible landmass, that are lifted by precursor technology at a point by which they hit a technological singularity, and their advancement of technology far outstripped their ability to understand and use such responsibly. All caused by no. Breathe deeply. Calm down. Xenoblade did this exact same plot point, and Xenoblade is good. You can get through this. No, for those who might or might not understand my little freak out there, it is not what you think. But it also is what you think. What caused humanity to hit their technological singularity is not in any way related to the Dot Hack franchise. And a technological singularity, for those not familiar with the term, is basically a point by which scientific and engineering advancement can be so quickly advanced it outstrips the developments of a prior generation by so much it's as if a caveman went from first learning fire to launching a rocket into space in one lifetime. Theoretically, we could hit that point if we ever invent quantum computing technology, as quantum computing permits such fast data processing that will allow for the creation of artificial intelligences or permit the means by which to produce experimental technologies with such precision that entirely outstrips our manufacturing capabilities now. One example to that usually being cold fusion. We know how cold fusion works, and it is possible to do. We just cannot produce the parts with the manufacturing accuracy and quality required to make it work. Just imagine an AI using a 3D printer to build a fully functioning giant robot, and you're in the ballpark of the kind of thing we're working with here. And quantum computing has made appearances in CyberConnect's works before, in the third era of .hack content as part of the Mama Conspiracy storyline. As I kind of waffled on getting into the specifics of that storyline, primarily because it is an idiot plot that badly damages the entire franchise, and I will be doing a video on why in the future. One of the goals of the Mama Conspiracy was to create quantum computing technology by which to surpass humanity itself, trapping people's minds, and entire bodies, and linking them together so they could use their brains as a means of mass data crunching and calculation, and use that to just control and destroy the world network, before trapping everyone within it because the Mama cult believes human technological progress was destroying the world's ability to produce oxygen, and apparently removing the ability to have oxygen was key to killing the planet. And they believed this and kept causing acts of cyber terror because a rich white woman told them that was the solution. Which it isn't and doesn't. Frankly, the refusal for humanity to accept tech advancements and alternative options does more harm than sticking to the old ways. And yet, one of the major problems of the conspiracy plotline is it never puts it in those terms, but treats what the organization Mama is doing as necessary to save humanity, even though the actions they take are leading to the direct opposite. One example tied to this, just to show what I'm talking about, you know why we stopped using chlorofluorocarbons like Freon as a refrigerant in air conditioners? Well, CFCs react badly with the atmosphere and cause ozone depletion, while at the same time trapping heat that is radiated down upon us, simultaneously making it so we get the bad types of radiation from space, while making it so we have too much of the energy that keeps our planet warm. They entered public use because of military surplus from World War II that had to be repurposed as they were originally developed as a fire suppressor for aircraft and to counter soldiers wielding flamethrowers on the battlefield. Because there was so much of that surplus to use, the commercial market got it cheap, so started using it for everything, regardless of the environmental impact, and companies using it didn't want to swap to something less harmful because it was so cheap. But because CFCs don't break down on their own, yet react catastrophically with O3 oxygen that makes up ozone into all sorts of atmospheric pollutants, their continued production was so detrimental that if they hadn't finally been banned 20 years after they realized how bad they were, we would be breathing ammonia right now. 30 years of keeping as many CFCs out of the atmosphere as possible, and most of their damage to the ozone layer has been stopped, and over time it has recovered significantly. The problem is not everything that used them has been traded out for modern versions without them, and certain older manufacturing processes that haven't gone out of use still release them as a byproduct, and their first replacement, hydrofluorocarbons, were just as bad about trapping heat, and it took even longer for a ban on them to actually be enforced, only for a certain orange-skinned, tiny-handed, propaganda-spewing dumbass to spearhead deregulation efforts against them and other atmospheric pollutants that were causing the problem in the first place. And if we just stopped putting them in the atmosphere entirely, the problem will literally fix itself. But why they don't is corporate interest lobbyists buy politicians off so they don't have to, and stricter regulation on them never gets passed, even though it actually is less expensive now to invest in means that mitigate the release as byproducts than it is to keep the bribes going. As when the 2020 pandemic quarantine happened, there was recorded drops in all types of pollutants in the atmosphere, not because humans suddenly went away or stopped using any form of personal transport, but because all the manufacturing facilities that still released them went offline without their workers there operating them. Meaning, we have empirical evidence now that it's not individual human activity that is the problem, but corporations literally refusing to modernize their manufacturing capabilities. And a significant detail part of why the Mama Conspiracy gets so bad is it is eventually revealed their cult controls enough corporate interests and governmental positions at the height of their power to literally do all of that themselves and impose the regulations that would resolve the problem they're attempting genocide to prevent, without having to depopulate the planet by turning people into data and stuffing them into a video game. There is a lot more to why the plotline is so bad than that. Let's explain the lack of a video on it yet. But why I had that little freakout at this moment in Solatorobo is a large portion of the Mama conspiracy happens because their members hijack the In the .hack universe version of CyberConnect, which I refer to in my .hack reviews as CC Corp to distinguish the fictional company from the real-life game developer. And the logo that is used here in Solatorobo is the same one that is used by the fictional CC Corp in .hack and not the real game developer. And as a result of my panic over this, well, I went and asked people who worked for the real-life CyberConnect themselves, and no, it's not related. CyberConnect, the developer, merely inserted that logo in here as nothing more than an Easter egg joke reference to the fictional version of themselves being a computer tech company, and is not a reference to a possible doomsday scenario caused by the Mama cult's beliefs and inhumanity, as .hack and Littletail Bronx are not in continuity with one another. In the Littletail Bronx universe, they were just the ones to first invent quantum computing, thus the systems we eventually encounter having their brand on them. It still comes off in poor taste to me, but by 2011 when Solatorobo was released, it seemed like CyberConnect's development teams were distancing themselves from the Mama conspiracy storyline due to the mess it ended up as. But if it's not the Mama conspiracy storyline, what actually happened in the Littletail Bronx backstory? Well, I hate to say it, but, well, ancient alien AIs. Yeah. The sad thing is, I'm far more accepting of the aliens did explanation than I am of this world being a bad end timeline for the .hack franchise. Now, I am primarily getting the information I'm about to share from a collection of Littletail Bronx information archive and databook lore material that has been translated by a fan of the series that goes by the username 5Ben55. But I did my due diligence this time because of my other loathing of the Mama conspiracy to make sure such was consistent with the information about these matters provided in the game. Thus, as far as I am aware from all the translated material, what I'm about to summarize here is what actually happened, and why things are the way they are. So, in Littletail Bronx, humanity had been guided since its infancy by alien data terminals containing alien AIs named Juno, which would pop up inconsistently throughout human history as records of them and their locations would be found and lost amidst humanity's various wars. In 1971, at the height of the Cold War, an Australian research team managed to find the fifth confirmed Juno and made contact with it. This specific Juno named after Yurlungur, the goddess of rainbows from Australian mythology, who is also known as the Rainbow Serpent, and Yurlungur being the Juno that Red and Elle eventually encounter in Solatorobo once they find a way down to the surface world deep below the Cloud Sea. The being held within a tower that's all that's left of what used to be the Australian continent, that acts as a central server complex that allows her to continue to function after all this time, separated from the world. Not quite the same as Aura, but close enough. But in the backstory, Yurlungur's discovery allowed humanity to find her four companion AI, and then the world governments on behalf of their economic backers got greedy, and conflict started over the possession of them, with the treaty eventually worked out by the four found Juno, but not Yurlungur herself as she was incapable of doing so, offering to create lesser copy offspring versions of themselves to end this argument and more broadly act as humanity's guide. And with these systems kept to the main continents of the world, it hyper-accelerated mankind's technological development, until the point they became capable of creating the power crystals we've seen in the current setting of the Littletail Bronx games. However, this tech advancement caused a disastrous feedback loop, as people were getting more and more advanced things without the true wisdom of understanding them and how to use them wisely and responsibly. And when the power crystals made all other forms of fuel and energy production obsolete, well, it crashed the economic markets, which spiraled into nations whose primary export was those fuels before, devolving into them supporting terrorist activities upon nations most benefited by the Juno, which escalated into war, as each of the derivative Junos were capable of constructing and maintaining the existence of Titano Machina on behalf of the nations that held them. The nations most affected by these terrorist attacks did not act with restraint in regards to unleashing these titans on those responsible for mass death, which when other countries with Juno and Titano Machina expressed opposition to the callous use of such war machines, not for humanitarian reasons, but for their own personal economic interests and the possibility of gaining more Juno for themselves, it spiraled into a world war where any further technological development was driven towards winning and claiming the Juno from their enemies to prevent further use from the other side, until even those factions splintered into smaller ones, and everyone decided to look out for only themselves. Basically, the backstory for Little Bronx's fall of humanity plays off a far more relatable allegory than the Mama conspiracy attempted, that of untempered hate and nationalist greed during the Cold War never ending, and applying the mindset of those years to events that happened later, causing a greater and greater series of atrocities that results in the final World War. And no one was able to do the responsible thing and talk shit out like adults. Instead, the factions stroked the fires of nationalism with propaganda and outright lies that made everyone else but them the other to oppose, defeat, and conquer. Yeah, the crap that's caused the mess of the last few decades isn't new. It's again an example of CyberConnect being good with allegory and predicting a possible future via a good writer's grasp of the human condition, and where things can go bad if the wrong people are given their say by the idiot masses. And using America's real conduct towards Afghanistan and Iraq as their allegorical basis, considering the disasters and atrocities that have resulted directly from them, and from likewise looking the other way towards those doing the same because it benefits us, or even the long history of similar foreign policy disasters caused by the Cold War that resulted in many modern-day crises, such as the mass immigration out of Central America that can actually be blamed as having their root causes come from Republican policies during the Reagan administration? Well, it's not hard to see how easily it could all go wrong in a fictional version of the world, where all the wrong people are in charge and only out for themselves. Hell, the backstory book I got all this from, the Solatorobo supplementary material art book that fans translated years ago, was released in 2011. And it accurately predicted not just how the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 would go because the population of the country by and large hated the US occupation and were happy to shove us out once they were supplied by reinforcements by the orange idiot, but also the US trying to institute isolationist us-first policies would backfire and make things worse for everyone. Again, to go back to the caveman analogy, teach a caveman how to make and use fire responsibly, and they'll be able to keep themselves warm for the rest of their life. Give a caveman fire, and they'll burn their entire tribe to the ground. And that's what happened in Little Bronx. The Juno gave them fire in the form of advanced technology they didn't know how to use and understand properly. And in their irresponsible greed to claim the keepers of fire held by others, they all burned. And by the point Yurlunger interceded, as the only Juno who had neither participated in this conflict nor was able to generate copies of herself or the Titanomachina at all, humanity was a crippled shell of its former self. And yet the war was still raging on. Thus, when she offered to the survivors a means by which to reset all the damage done, well, they took it. And the reset she triggered shut down all the Titanomachina, but likewise caused all of humanity to die, and be stored as data in one massive quantum computer complex known as Tartaros, which was then sealed off from normal space inside a pocket dimension of its own. While I deeply dislike how the backstory info says a very small group of people made this decision to literally end everything and start over, and it's that exact same type of arrogant nihilism that gets me so angry about the Mama conspiracy, well, I at least try to look at it from the perspective of those who had been survivors of that war. To the people who had managed to live through it, hell, they had already lost everything anyways, and with over 100 Titanomachina used to glass the planet and devastate the surface, well, who even knows if the Earth at the time was even capable of sustaining whatever population was left? Thus, it is more understandable to me that they would make this decision, especially if the Juno under Yurlunger would then focus their attention on ways to fix things. So when humanity would reemerge, they could better learn at a more reasonable pace than their predecessors did. That isn't quite what ended up happening, as Yurlunger did more than just steal away humanity and shut down the rampaging machine gods. Her reset affected the entire planet, the landmasses being even further devastated and pulled from the ground, instead being suspended in the sky as the island continents we've seen. The remains of the surface still left behind, sealed off from those transplanted to the islands by a massive plasma barrier beneath the sea of clouds. Why was that necessary? I have absolutely no idea. But genetic re-engineering by the Juno alongside utilization of nanomachines caused the rapid adaptation and evolution of the species set upon these island arcs, with cats and dogs evolved into a human-like form as the new dominant species. And this was because the researchers who discovered Yurlunger kept an assortment of cats and dogs as companion pets, and Yurlunger believed their familiar forms would be the best to serve as their welcome to the new world once things were ready for their return. And she did plan for them to eventually return. That is what Operation Coda is. It's one of the steps to returning humanity to the world, by causing the island continents to return to their place upon the mainland Earth, so all races will be allowed to thrive again in a new, more accepting harmony. We will ignore how the islands floating in the sky in and of itself is ridiculous, and the amount of power that would be required to maintain that for millennia is astronomical, as this is technology so advanced it might as well be magic. So complaining about that is entirely pointless. I accept it in Xenoblade Chronicles, I can accept it here. When you're capable of freely manipulating subatomic matter with nanomachines and can create perpetual energy generators that run off of background radiation, you end up getting more leeway for this kind of thing. What matters is consistency of setting within your story, why things happen certain ways because of what is established about the setting you're telling your story in. And with that tech level being so far beyond the character's understanding outside the principles to it, it's not necessary it be explained in detail, as the details in this case are not important. A setting like, say, Star Trek, that's where the details of why the setting works the way it does is a bit more important, and why fans of it tend to come down so hard on when it's blatantly being contradicted. But the real conundrum the story is presenting us with now is, it's too soon for the return to happen. Bion was one of a group of hybrid beings created by the Juno meant to monitor the progress of the world so they would know when it was time to free humanity from their purgatory and it would be alright for them to go back. But the Beastmen finding Bion's cryopod caused him to awaken early, and due to how he was created, he's solely slave to fulfilling his purpose without understanding that it's not time yet, that he isn't supposed to act on his orders yet, because he was never taught, hey, maybe check to see if things are ready? And even then, he doesn't know the proper order of events he has to perform to make sure this restoration is successful. Thus, he's skipping several important steps. As Operation CODA stands for Continent Orientation Defloat Alignment. But Bion doesn't understand that before he can defloat the islands, he needs other Juno to bring down the plasma barrier that separates the islands and the cloud sea from the oceans and remaining land masses below them. If they don't, then when the islands all stop floating, they'll all be dropped into and vaporized by the plasma barrier, and everyone and thing will die, including any humans brought out of Tartarus, and even Tartarus itself if Bion tries to land it back on the surface. Because the data of the cryopod was corrupted, Bion in no way realizes this, or the proper order of operations he needs to successfully implement his orders. Thus why he needed the hybrids Mariville and her fellow Beastman scientists developed with his assistants, to act as his interim conduit to use the Titano Machina to force open the door to Tartaros. At which point the Juno inside Tartaros would automatically signal the Juno in charge of maintaining the island's flotation to drop them. And you see how things would all spitball from there into everything dying. Yeah, it kinda seems like the Juno are a pretty dumb AI existence to allow things to not only spiral out of control like that, but also allow all these sorts of mishaps in their systems and not train anyone to confirm that the conditions were right for these events to trigger. It wouldn't surprise me if these things were responsible for the downfall of whatever alien civilization they originated from. Or worse, what if they're copies of copies in the same way their offspring were copies, and each generation is less capable of an AI than the last? It's possible this entire cycle has happened before on other planets the Juno were present on, and humanity itself were a species born after a previous race's reset was triggered. Thus why the Juno were active in interfering with natural development. What? While that's not canon, it doesn't prevent it from being an explorable possibility. Unfortunately, your Longer cannot intercede and stop this herself by countermanding Bion's order and tell him where he's fucking up. Hell, she can't even tell the Juno controlling the plasma barrier to drop it so Bion triggering the islands to return to the ground won't kill anyone. The only thing she can do is give Red and L an emergency shutdown command called Recoda that will reverse everything Bion set in motion, and in doing so return humanity to their purgatory for who knows how long. Kinda seems like she's doing the absolute bare minimum here. I mean, she's the one that was responsible for the reset that set this all up. You'd think she'd have some means of personal control in the matter, or could give them a code that would tell the other Juno controlling the plasma barrier to drop it. Then again, letting the return begin would destroy the Little Tail Bronx setting, and not really allow more tales to be told with the Beast Peoples, as humans would be back, and taking center focus. But it's not like CyberConnect has gotten the chance to progress the story past this in any meaningful way, and Fuga is a prequel story. To be honest, I kind of had a thought about all this where I'm actually curious about the plausibility of it. .gu, as I've mentioned before, revamped the in-game setting of the World MMORPG to accommodate Beastman races, which are based off both cat and dog-like humanoids like the Canino and Philoneco. With context to Tail Concerto, as I've said, it makes sense for the developer to keep that aspect of their works alive in referential form like this, and it does contrast well against the human characters. More than that, in the internal backstory of the World R2, the setting does feature airships, floating structures in the sky, gigantic titans, and pseudo-godlike creatures whom devastated landmasses, and a goddess named Aurora that separated the lands of the setting from the rest of a potentially larger realm. Considering the elements of internal story consistency and recurring themes and motifs utilized between all of CyberConnect's original works, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the setting of the World R2 could be considered as a possible post-Coda timeline for Littletail Bronx, as not just a predecessor franchise for the developer of CyberConnect, but what might potentially happen once humanity is let back upon the land and the June are allowed to sleep again with their task done. Or alternatively to that wall in R2 setting being the borderlands sailing inside it the last humans living upon the planet, where a few tribes of beastmen just managed to emigrate to themselves. And yeah, it's not a real thing or something they did, I know. I just wanted to share it as it got stuck in my head. The two settings are just that reminiscent of each other, and I don't know whether to just put it down to CyberConnect getting into a certain vibe with a steampunk fantasy setting for their internal games to exist in, or something else entirely. Anyways, with this knowledge and Recoda in hand, Red and L return to the skies as the forces of Curvaz prepare to take on the Machina and at least stave them off. And Marivel's been modifying her power cells to be able to do more to disable them. But here's the problem with using Recoda. They have to wait until Bion's plan is almost complete until they can use it, meaning they've got a very small window of opportunity for it to actually work. Worse, Bion's preparations are complete, Nero and Blanc convening once more on Pharaoh as that city is placed right at the mouth of the space fold that holds Tartaros within it, with the two Titanomachina key to wrenching the door for it open. Purgatory complex floating in the sky like a massive new moon, visible to every landmass in Shepherd. But this gives the assembled an idea. If they have to get into Tartaros, why not use the Titanomachina to open the door? Bruno's action shows the two can be hijacked, and El and Beluga have the training to control them in one aspect, so why not another? The difficulty there being that Red would need to subjugate Nero and Blank first, as they could screw over their hijack attempts with the Machina. It's actually easier than you'd expect to find them though, as Bion's actually already discarded the hybrids he bred, telling them to do whatever they want. But much like Bion, they don't know what to do with freedom and free will, as while they have personality, any idea of really thinking for themselves has been bred out of them, just fulfilling their purpose. But they have no idea of what to do after that purpose is done, their all-consuming goal fulfilled. And they don't grasp that there needs to be something to do that comes after. And the irony is, Bion's the same way. Complete his orders and then nothing but question marks. It is the frustrating and yet understandable thing about plotlines with artificial humans and outer god eldritch monsters, and even some with just villains that are defined by some glorious purpose so consuming. There's no thought to the aftermath, and it's so short-sighted. Sure, sometimes their grand scheme is just so far off from believing it can be done that not thinking about the after makes sense, since their goal is meant to take a lifetime to fulfill. But the fixation often becomes the problem, that to achieve this thing, you can cast aside everything of value that would allow someone to have something after they achieve their goal. And that's what we got here with Bion, Nero, and Blanc. Nero and Blanc were bred to do one thing: control the Titanomachina to open the way to Tartaros, and nothing else. This is shown when after they gain their freedom to choose, that they just go back to attacking Red because he was an enemy of their glorious purpose before, having fused together their personal mecha that are similar to the Dahak into even more powerful fighting super robots. Yeah, about that. All the mecha design in Solatorobo was created by Yoshitaka Taniguchi, who is one of the people behind all of the Super Robot Wars original mecha for the audience insert protagonists of that crossover game franchise. His most infamous design was for the Belzalute, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, one of the main protagonist mechs from Super Robot Wars J, which I only recently learned had actually been fan-translated. And yeah, Taniguchi's mecha designs, I really like them. Hell, I generally like the mecha designs of the Little Tail Bronx games overall, as they're distinct from a lot of the machines I usually end up seeing. Looking at their concept art, a lot of Taniguchi's designs kinda remind me of the work Toru Nakayama did for the Mega Man Zero games. Sadly, the Hawk can't exactly fly without special equipment parts, and that equipment is more for the airship races as it is. So this mid-boss is one of several that has special rules to it. I've not brought it up, but the game does work to break up the monotony of just lift and throw throughout it. After all, when a lot of your enemies in the sky are on their own mobile ships, they do on occasion supply you guns to just shoot at stuff. And because the twins' mecha were created by Beastman hands, even if they are made from precursor nanotechnology, well, you can still just shoot them enough and they'll break if you use high enough caliber ammunitions, which is thankfully supplied via the entire fight taking place on top of an armored rail car meant to defend the city of Pharaoh in the events of an invasion, which in the series' backstory has actually happened. Once more, a thing about steampunk fantasy kind of overblew the capabilities of, alongside some series like, say, Evangelion. Railway guns mounting high-yield artillery did exist in real life, but quite frequently when they were fired, they caused the platforms they were mounted on to be derailed off of the line, and they couldn't be fired while the train pulling them was moving. Otherwise, the kickback would tear the car couplings apart. Things like lower-yield weapons like Gatling guns could more easily be used, but stuff like that would fall in line towards being defensive measures against fighters performing low-altitude bombings or strafing the far slower-moving means of transport. Kind of like what we're doing right now in the game, so what the game is doing is not at all an issue. But military wanting to maintain consistent supply lines usually meant they'd want to not destroy train lines in the first place, so there was an overt need to make them a legitimate military target to attack any more than them existing already would. And there were cheaper means by which to defend them. Thus the production pretty much got discontinued. Mobile defense platforms for an island city though, that makes a lot more sense. But here's why Bion left Narrow and Blank as loose ends. They're not going to continue being such for long. They were only meant to do one thing one time, and then their bodies would begin to break down and they would die. It's why, as we saw in the tease for the beginning of the second act, that Bion had them in cryopods until he was ready to begin. They were always made to live on borrowed time. Red, because he was a failure towards the project's goals, was allowed to be treated so he would have a normal lifespan and not have this crippling defect in their make, which was a means of control lest they rebel against their intended masters. Funny story about that. These three, yeah, they're not the only ones Bion and Merville made. One of the Solatorobo side stories CyberConnect published involves a story of one of the precursor experiments getting their head a dream of seeing the rise of the dawn outside the facility, and escapes with Merville's help, as by that point she was already having second thoughts as Bion began liquidating the creations that had no hope of controlling the machines. But because they were designed to die in the event they defied orders, well, this subject quickly succumbs without real purpose to guide the little time he has left. Until Elle finds him, her medallion resonating with him as she was seeking a sacrifice to shut down Lemures that had been awakened by Bion's activities at the time. And 10 years before the current events of the story, this subject happily gave what life they had left, because Elle gave him a purpose to fulfill with his last breath of his own free will. It is the root events that traumatized Elle against wanting to use the medallion to seal the Titano Machina, as the sheer joy that Hybrid was overcome with in that moment she took his life, it horrified her, and started her to look for other ways than constantly finding a sacrifice to keep them asleep. And learning of what the errant subject did, it implied that this was the breaking point for Merville towards thinking of her creations as just tools, leading to her familial attachment to Red, and her plotting his escape when Bion finally got his two perfect tools and exterminated the rest they made. But the reason they're designed to die isn't just because of how they were made, but the fact they were made from Felineko and Kaninu genes that weren't meant to maintain a humanoid form. The metamorphosis itself strains their bodies. Red only not showing it because his use of the transform is very brief. But Narrow and Blank, They've been stuck in their transformed states all of their lives, and only revert to being beastmen at the point they're on the verge of death themselves. But they don't see this. They think the grand order Bion is seeking to fulfill will give them a new purpose, a new reason to exist, and life through glorious purpose! But the problem is, well, it's as I said. The Juno end up being kinda dumb AIs with very straightforward thinking. Thus, the hybrids Bion created are not recognized by the system. Thus, all the three of them receive are orders without context. Those in Tartarus begging to be let out of purgatory, to destroy their prison. But without context of that, they think it's just telling them to kill all the Beastmen, even though it's now revealed that they are Beastmen as well. And unfortunately, while his siblings are too weak to follow the order, Red is not, being forced to attack and devastate their combined mecha and take his siblings' lives, only eventually able to throw off the command that is pounding itself into his skull when it tried to make him kill L as well, leaving him racked with guilt. Something it takes a bit of time and support from L for him to work through. Even though, remember, she's currently immortal, so he couldn't kill her even if he wanted to. Plus, first act of the plot with the medallion and its right of forfeit. Almost killing the other and yet still being there for them is kinda their thing. Still, with Nero and Blank now out of the picture, it leaves open the path to getting the Machina under control. Red escorting L through Lemures to its control core, while Beluga re-enters Lares. And here's where we get another reason why Nero and Blanc ended up so drained. Hijacking control of a Titano Machina just exhausts that much power from those attempting it, that it actually takes someone with Beluga and L's immortality thrust upon them to actually do it. And as a consequence, it drains their immortality away, leaving them as regular people once again, allowing Red and L's companionship romance arc to potentially reach a good conclusion in the future. With them in control of them, the two Machina and the Curvaz fleet fire on Tartaros, destroying the shield around it and letting Red into it. The Dahak being further augmented by its fusion with Nero and Blank's mech's nanotechnology into its ultimate form, the Septentarion. I want to build that. I'd also try and give an etymology to its name that I figured would relate to some type of dragon, but all I got from Googling it is just Shin Megami Tensei, Devil Survivor 2, and Scarlet Nexus, both of which used the name after Solatorobo came out. It might be a mistranslation of Septentrion, which the Little Tales Wiki names the mech as, which is an anachronistic term that is a title for the 7 stars of the Ursa Major and Minor star clusters, the North Stars guiding the way. Though admittedly, I keep wanting to call it Serpentera. But yeah, the Septentarion makes the following stage much easier, as the internal structures of Tartaros is nothing but data cube blocks, and it's quite a journey into it to find its core, which is made more difficult by Bion himself being just plain allowed in due to his status as a senior hybrid with proper access codes, bombarding Red with images of humanity's failure, of their meaningless self-destructive society, and this is where Bion just lost me as a big bad antagonist. His entire goal of being is to serve the order that is the revival of humanity, but he hates humanity as they were failures? What is even the hell? I get that as the big bad they have to look down and denigrate others not part of their goals, but their goal is the restoration of the society he is now looking down upon. Unless he plans to rule over them with assistance of the Juno, which is not part of the orders that define his perfection, this doesn't make sense. He does say that's what he wants and what he interprets his orders as being, but even then that's in contradiction of what he's supposed to be doing. Hell, one could reason, thanks to the backstory info for the Little Tale Bronx franchise, that the blind following of orders and blind enslavement to group thought instead of deciding for themselves whether a course of action is bad or not is actually part of why things went bad. Because the grand majority of the time, it's certain specific people manipulating others to enrich themselves that cause all the problems of the world as that selfishness escalates conflicts. That's not exactly failure, that's people not being allowed to exercise free will. Hell, Bion and the Juno come off as bigger failures as in their perfection, they keep doing everything wrong. This is actually why he set Nero and Blank off on the Beast Peoples though, and plans to kill them all off with his implementation of Operation Coda. He sees the same defects he sees in humanity intrinsically part of the Kaninu and Philoneco. Their wars, their struggles with the world around them, their difficulties to grow past themselves and focus on things he views as meaningless in comparison to the glorious purpose he was created to complete. And that's entirely the problem that Juno has caused, as he can't see past his born-to-achieve purpose to see any value in the life around him. The largest conflicts of the world are born when one person is given too much power in one form or another and keep wanting more than they should have. Doesn't matter if it's economic, military, social, or political power. When enough isn't enough, it always starts the escalation. But the problem is, again, that Juno and the hybrid's failure to understand that a race has to grow into changes, be given a reason to be better, not just a purpose and goal to complete where they reach only so far, but no farther beyond that. It needs to be something that has no end. Otherwise, they keep reaching laterally for more to fill a void in self-destructive ways. As a journey to better oneself is one that naturally never ends. Thus, the journey itself is one that becomes fulfilling just to travel down, even if someone makes a mistake. That can be a learning experience one doesn't need to repeat again. So the only true time someone fails is when they give up on ever trying to improve or make things better. And remember, in Little Bronx, humanity ended themselves after the point where they couldn't make things better. And the calamity happened because the Juno didn't understand their role in enabling their lack of personal growth that caused their irresponsibility. And Bion is a product of that, thus can't claim to be perfect himself due to all the mistakes he's making, but is not learning from. The Beast Peoples have not reached that point by the fact they were in a time of peace when he started all this up. He's destroying them before the point they failed and ignoring any motive progress they have made. And that is of course the reasoning Red has for his refuting of Bion's entire diatribe, that screwing up is a natural part of life. It's baked into the experience, and he needs to recognize he's screwing up himself and forcing failure on others for no other reason than to see them fail. The exact thing he seems to so hate. Thus, in their failed perfection, with Bion unable to grow to surpass his own designed limits, well, it's not unexpected that the perfect failure allowed to grow like any natural being completely trumps his capabilities. Bion is forced to confront his own failure at last, and Red installs Recoda, returning humanity to their sleep to await the day when things will be ready for them to properly return. Red escapes the Tartaros intact, reuniting with his friends and family to continue on into the future. Well, give or take a few DLC bonus missions that were included on the cartridge for people who got the game in the US, which are all set in the post-game to give more closure to the story than this ending did. Regardless of that, this game is great! Look, you're all probably used to me being a complete shill for CyberConnect's works by now, but I honestly feel if it's gotten a chance for release on a mainline console and not just a handheld one, that it would have done even better than it did, and I can see why the game is really well rated. While GU remains the apex of CyberConnect's collective works, Solatorobo takes many cues from its structure, arc, and world building from those prior projects that makes it really enjoyable to explore this world thanks to how much better it is fleshed out, and the time it takes to connect you to its cast regardless of their alignment in the grand scheme. While I was trying to be a bit more abridged in my coverage of the story this time around instead of breaking down every plot point, one of the casualties of that was I didn't take the time to really touch on Curvaz's special ops team, and I really mentally compare them to a few of the supporting characters we see in the GU games that pop up on occasion as either rivals or mini-antagonists that have their own story. I really liked fighting them and the mechanics their stuff employs. And short of fishing being obnoxious and my complete failure at the airship races, alongside how it's difficult to get money in the game if you're not grinding in the arena, I really didn't have many problems with anything here. It was just a fun, relaxing ride start to finish, with no single thing overstaying its welcome, which allowed me to be that endeared by what's here. Like I've said, I'll get to reviewing Fuga eventually, for I have seen all the supplementary material CyberConnect has translated for us, so fans don't have to do that this time. But I have an assortment of CyberConnect 2 related games to do in the meantime to show once more how respected the company is. If you can find a copy of this and have a DS or 3DS to run it on, I really recommend this one. Even better if you can find a copy of it like I have, where the release of the game includes the game's soundtrack. I just hope that if CyberConnect ever takes a shot at trying to collect their Little Bronx games, as they outright own the IP, they try and adapt Solatorobo's setup so it works out similarly to how Capcom dealt with the Mega Man ZX games. What? It could happen.
差し伸べ